All right. Morning, everyone. Oh, can everyone see and hear me? All right. Very good. Okay, so today we begin our look at the second chapter of our textbook. We're going to be talking about knowledge. So let's just get the slideshow going here. Now, first, I think a little bit of recap would be helpful. Um, so we'll do that. We talked primarily about skepticism last week. Um, Now, of course, the skeptic's challenge to anyone that claims to have knowledge of something is how do you know that you really do know what you think you know, right? How um, how do we determine uh, which of our beliefs, even our true beliefs, count as instances of knowledge? Um, I don't mind if the students are on video or not. Although I do ask if I think it's helpful when discussion gets going to raise our hands rather than jump in the chat. Not to say that, don't ask me questions in the chat or anything like that. No, I mean that when a lot of discussion gets going, it just gets difficult to keep track of questions. That's only when the chat is really busy. So that's why I recommend raising your virtual hand. Right. So the skeptic's challenge is how do we know, oh, excuse me, that any of our how do we know when our true beliefs count as knowledge, right? Last time we discussed Descartes' skeptical arguments in detail. Remember, Descartes not really a skeptic, but he wants to defeat the most skeptical challenges that he can think of. And that's why he's formulated the dream argument and the demon argument. The dream argument is meant to undermine the notion that we can have knowledge from sense experience, and the demon argument is meant to undermine the notion that, um, that we can have a priori knowledge. And of course, Descartes identifies a sort of foundation, a sort of single thing that he can know with certainty. Um, Remember, the criterion for knowledge for Descartes seems to be infallibility, right? So he's looking for a belief that he cannot possibly be wrong about, and that is his cogito. I am, I exist. From there, he can build up his knowledge again. We also learned about David Hume on induction. And David Hume is primarily concerned about knowledge. Knowledge, uh, it's not, it's probably not knowledge for Hume, right? But he's concerned with beliefs about what will happen in the future. Um, Hume doesn't think there's a necessary connection between um, A's and B's were the examples we used last time, right? In the past, all A's have been followed by B's. An A is being observed now, therefore a B will follow. That's just something we're naturally inclined to do. Um, but we're not rationally entitled to our belief because there's no necessary connection between A's and B's, just a constant conjunction. And we'll actually return to this today. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, yeah, we'll be talking about knowledge, primarily about the two traditions in philosophy that have a um, differing claims about the nature of knowledge. That's rationalism and empiricism, and of course, we'll discuss the notions of a priori and a posteriori knowledge. So, with that said, let's talk about knowledge. You probably know who these two are. Does anyone want to tell me? Getting some light here coming in, some rays of light. So
Would it be
we've got Plato and
Plato?
Aristotle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So which one's which? And why do we, why is one, why are they making these gestures with their hand and with their hands? And what books are they holding? How do we tell which one's which? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Plato's this guy. He's carrying one of his later dialogues, the Timaeus, and he's pointing up because Plato is the idealist. Plato is, as we'll see, the rationalist. Aristotle's pointing kind of down and forward at the earth. Aristotle is the empiricist. Um, and you can see here he's got his copy of the Ethics, the Nicomachean Ethics, right here. This is part of a painting, or rather, technically a fresco, called The School of Athens by Raphael. And it this same image is the banner for our class on Brightspace, incidentally. So this is kind of at least in the Western tradition, I suppose, um, where we begin this division between rationalism, and empiricism. So Plato and Aristotle agree that if we have genuine knowledge, then what we have is knowledge of universal truths, things that are true regardless of time and place, as it were, right? But where they differed is this. Plato thought that knowledge is attained by the exercise of the intellect, and Aristotle thought that knowledge comes from the senses. That is why Aristotle is classed as a rationalist, and or Aristotle is classed as an empiricist, and Plato a rationalist. And this has persisted more or less up to the present day. April, go ahead.
Can you repeat that again? If we have genuine knowledge, we have.
Knowledge of universal truth. So
Okay, thank you.
things that are true across time and space, if you like, things that are true now just as much as they were true back in, I don't know, ancient Greece or something, right?
So would that be like numbers and like the kind of like that basic a priori knowledge that we kind of bring in? Like it never changes, but it's always the same.
For Plato, definitely, but not for Aristotle.
Okay.
Aristotle believed that um, not all knowledge comes from the exercise of the intellect. I mean, quite a lot of it does, but not all of it. So I'll explain further. Um, Let me switch my slide here. The thing that you really want to take away about Plato is that he believed that by using our minds, using our intellect, we could apprehend the nature of the intelligible forms or the ideas. And when we grasp the forms, when we have knowledge of the forms, we have true knowledge. So, some of you may be familiar with Plato's allegory of the cave. I think it may have come up in conversation last week when we were talking about the movie The Matrix in relation to Descartes' demon argument. But just in case it didn't, um, Plato wrote dialogues. So Plato's writing these sort of imaginative conversations between Socrates and his interlocutors, other people that he's speaking with. Yes, in fact, the allegory of the cave comes from the Republic. So Plato's writing these dialogues. The Republic, incidentally, is one of his longest ones. Um, and he puts allegories in here to try and teach us lessons. Um, the allegory of the cave is meant to teach us about the philosopher's journey from ignorance to knowledge. So, in the cave, there are these prisoners in this cave deep underground, and they're fettered. They're chained up. And behind them is a fire. And this fire burns and casts light against the cave wall. And these people are bound such that all they can see is this cave wall. Behind the fire, there's a sort of wall, rampart kind of thing. And people are walking across carrying various objects, and these are also casting shadows on the walls. And the prisoners look at the shadows and they mistake them for reality. And they even start to give names to the shadows that they see. So it's the shadow of a chair, and they call it a chair. And they think it's a real chair, and they think that this is the real nature of objects, right? But one of these prisoners one day breaks free, and he sees that the reality he is not reality at all. He's in a cave, and what he thought were real things were um, shadows being cast by the actual objects. Um, Eventually, he makes his way up and out of the cave and into the sunlight, and the sun is sort of like I've always thought it was symbolic of the form of the good. Um, Kind of illuminates everything, and then our philosopher goes back down into the cave to tell the other prisoners the truth, and of course, they just think he's insane. So that's the allegory of the cave in a nutshell. The objects that cast the shadows are the forms, the things in themselves, the pure objects of understanding. And they are divine, unchangeable, and perfect. Um, the shadows on the cave wall are the appearances, the phenomena, and we mistake them for reality, but they are not what is ultimately real for Plato. The forms are what are ultimately real for Plato. So if we can grasp the pure forms with our intellect, then we have true knowledge. Let's try and make it a little more concrete. Plato, not to throw too much history at you, history of philosophy, but Plato comes out of the Pythagorean tradition, and that was initiated by Pythagoras of Pythagorean theorem fame, right? A squared plus B squared equals C squared when it comes to triangles and so forth. Um, and Plato actually believed that in order to train the intellect, what you have to do is learn geometry before you go on and learn philosophy. In fact, on the doors of the academy, which was the university that Plato founded, it was inscribed, not one person untutored in geometry may enter here. So you had to be knowledgeable of geometry before you were not before you could become knowledgeable about philosophy. And so Plato spends a lot of time working on geometry, and he's drawing geometric figures in the sand and on the slates and so forth. And say he's drawing triangles. No matter how many triangles Plato draws, none of them are perfect. But he still has this idea of a perfect triangle where all the edges are perfectly straight and all the angles are perfect, etc., etc. Such a triangle can't exist in our world, but it exists in the world of the intelligible forms. And so Plato knows of the nature of triangles because he's grasped the nature of the intelligible form of the triangle. And for Plato, everything is like this. There's a form for not just different geometric shapes, but for different numbers, for oddness and evenness, for justice, for virtue, the good, the true, the beautiful. There's forms for everything for Plato. And if we can grasp those forms, we then have achieved knowledge, purely with the exercise of the intellect, Plato thinks. St. Augustine, who was a Neoplatonic philosopher, actually thought that because the physical things, the shadows on the cave wall, as it were, are changeable, we can't have knowledge of them. We can only have knowledge of the forms. He wrote, whatever is attained by sense, what we call the sensible, never for an instant ceases to change. Always it is in a state of uninterrupted becoming. And the perpetually changing cannot be comprehended. No genuine truth, and hence no knowledge, can be had by the senses. Um, so again, that's St. Augustine. That's not Plato. Whoops. That's not Plato himself. But Plato would agree that true knowledge is knowledge of the forms. Jeremiah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, you might have just answered my question. You said that knowledge, true form is knowledge, and if it can grasp the true form, it can attain knowledge through the practice of intellect. Is that right?
Yeah, you have to you can do all of this just with the pure exercise of your intellect. And as long if I like say I've studied triangles by just drawing all these imperfect triangles and I haven't grasped the possibility that I could have like a perfect like equilateral triangle where all the angles and the corners are perfectly equal and all the edges are perfectly straight, then I haven't really understood triangles, Plato might say, right? Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
thank you. Yeah, it does. It does.
Excellent. So, according to thinkers like Plato and St. Augustine, what we do when we come to know something is we're grasping what is necessarily true, what is perfect and unchangeable. But I mean, we don't just need the forms, we need a mind itself. We need reason. The ancient Greeks would have thought of this in terms of logos. Logos is the root of, well, lots of different words like logic, and any science that ends with ology, psychology, biology, anthropology, etc. Uh, in this context, it kind of means reasoning about or study of. It can also mean words or the word, true speech. Um, St. Augustine called reason or logos the light of the mind because reason illuminates things for us. Um, Descartes and Leibniz, much, much later on, would call our capacities of reason the natural light of reason. And if you're a rationalist, the exercise of reason is sufficient for acquiring knowledge because the senses don't tell us the way the world really is. It's not just that the senses can occasionally mislead us. If you think back to Descartes' dream argument, it's not just that we're occasionally mistaken, we're occasionally led astray. It's that, well, the senses, I mean, who knows? The senses could be representing something internal to us and not an objective reality. Oh, so that's why we can't trust the senses. But for empiricists like Aristotle over here, knowledge begins with the senses. So St. Thomas Aquinas, who was a scholastic philosopher in the Middle Ages, and probably Aristotle's biggest fan, said, the philosopher proves that the principle of our knowledge is in the senses. Whenever Thomas Aquinas says the philosopher, he's talking about Aristotle, right? So Aquinas is an Aristotelian, where Saint Augustine was a Platonist. Aquinas is a hardcore Aristotelian. So much so that he doesn't even name him. He just says the philosopher, like he's the only one that matters, right? Um, so empiricists say that we can have knowledge of universal truths, as I said earlier, but we do that by using the intellect, by exercising our reason, by doing philosophy or by doing science here. Why do I mention science specifically? Well, because again, for empiricists, it all begins with sense experience. And we can draw a bit of a clearer distinction here by thinking about the nature of a priori knowledge, that is, the knowledge that we have prior to sense experience. Rationalists and empiricists differ when it comes to knowledge in general, but they have some interesting differences when it comes to a priori knowledge specifically. Like, obviously, empiricists think that you can have some knowledge a posteriori. But some empiricists also think you can have certain a priori knowledge. The nature of that knowledge, though, is something that we should talk about. Historically, it's also important because in the 17th and 18th centuries, a lot of debate was devoted to the nature of a priori knowledge. And in the 20th century too, as we'll see. As we'll see this time. So we'll survey some of these debates and try to get clear about the difference, the differences between rationalists and empiricists by looking at a priori knowledge. So remember, if you're a rationalist, you believe that thinking or contemplating, philosophizing from the armchair, if you like, is sufficient for grasping some universal truths. We can grasp a priori knowledge, knowledge that we don't need sense experience to have with the exercise of the intellect. And the truths that we can come to know a priori are necessary truths. They're true no matter how changeable this world is and what changes in the world. These truths are true. In fact, a necessary truth will be true in every possible world, every logically possible world. Philosophers sometimes like to talk of possible worlds. They mean worlds that are logically impossible. We're not talking about like a multiverse kind of situation here where I don't know, maybe in another universe, there is another universe where I decided not to become a philosophy professor. Maybe I'm something else, right? A chef, say. Well, we're not talking about worlds that exist in parallel. We're talking about what could have been, right? We're talking about what could have been. Can we try and think of some examples of necessary truths? And you don't have to try and think of truths that might be true in every possible world, but what do we think are things that are true in the changeable, mutable, corruptible world that we inhabit, that are necessarily true? Philippe, go ahead.
All living things die.
Yeah. Is that a truth we could arrive at by the exercise of the intellect? I mean, it seems necessarily true that living things must die, but is that something I can know a priori? I don't know. Well, the seasons change every year. Well, I would say that that's a posteriori knowledge because it could turn out not to be the case. It's not logically necessary. Modus ponens, modus ponens and mathematical truths. Yeah, that's, I would say, certainly. Jeremiah, go ahead.
Planet is round, things like that.
What's that?
Earth is round, things like that.
Well, these are that's something that we discovered with sense experience. And there could be, I don't know, other shaped worlds. The planet Saturn, for example, is kind of squished on its poles because rotates so quickly, so it's not perfectly round, right? Um, so we're looking for things that we can know without sense experience. Justina, go ahead.
I'm not sure if this would be like a relevant example, but I remember the book saying something about bachelors being unmarried, for example. I'm not sure if that would be relevant here.
Yep, that's a priori, and it's necessarily true because of the way we've defined those terms. David.
Maybe like the world itself exists.
Um, I don't know because it's possible that it's logically possible that we could live in a simulation,
Mm,
right?
Yeah,
Um, but think of it like Descartes did. It's necessarily true that I exist whenever I think it or say it, right? Even if you're in a simulation.
yeah,
So, a necessary truth is something that we can know a priori and um, it will be true, in every possible world. And reason alone, whoops, will allow us to grasp these truths. This is what we call the traditional view of a priori knowledge. Um, well, I would say yes, math seems to identify necessary truths about the objects that it deals with. Built from atoms, this is something we know a posteriori. We need sense experience to know this. Every apple is a fruit. Yeah, I'd say once we acquire the concepts of apples and fruits, then we know that if you have an apple, then you have a fruit. You could say that being an apple is a sufficient condition for being a fruit, and that being a fruit is a necessary condition in order to be an apple. Um, yeah, triangles have three sides. Yeah, exactly. Jeremiah, go ahead.
Still don't understand. So you mean that necessary truth is something we can name a priori and will be true in every universe in sense, and we don't, and we need sense knowledge to prove it. Is that right? I'm confused.
Yeah, we don't need our senses. It's something like, well, the triangle example is a good one, right? Like, all triangles have three sides is something you don't have to go out and try and find every triangle that exists and check whether it has three sides, right? Because you just know, like, definitionally, triangles have three sides. Or the example in the book was, I think the author said, like, tell your psychology professor that you're going to go and survey every bachelor on campus to see if you can find any that are married, and you're going to get laughed at because definitionally bachelors are unmarried, right? You don't have to go out and survey all of them to make sure that none of them are married, right? Yeah, that's right. Another one was all vixens are female foxes, or all joeys are baby marsupials. Is one that I used last year when I taught this course, right? So, well, the concepts, Chloe, that's a good point. We acquire the concepts with sense experience. There's a point at which I have to learn what a triangle is, right? Maybe I'm a little kid and I'm watching Sesame Street or something, and I don't know. Today is brought to you by the letter H and this triangle, right? Um, okay, so I learn what a triangle is, and then I come to master that concept, and I realize, okay, definitionally, all triangles have three sides. All Mr. Redstones never have enough coffee. Well, that might be a necessary truth. What if a language doesn't have a definition for a concept? Well, yeah, that could be a problem. We might have to try and put it into words. Well, some people, Jonathan, think that it's only true of the that a priori knowledge only includes those things, but we'll get to that. We're coming up on that actually. April, go ahead.
Would it be like all female mammals give birth to babies?
Yeah, like live birth.
Yeah.
I would say yes. Um, but that I don't know. That could be it gets tricky. Like we're what we'll learn today is that this distinction between a priori and a posteriori and rationalism and empiricism is not as straightforward as it looks at a first pass, right?
Okay.
Um, no, if there are, yeah, oh, platypus, yeah, there are platypus. So not all mammals give live birth. Um, okay, are exceptions to the rule still necessary? No. So if there are exceptions, then no. Okay. Kara, go ahead.
Do you need words to be able to define? Like, if you have something that you're like, this is a concept that could be a priori knowledge, do you need the words to be able to consider it a priori knowledge? Like, do you need to be able to put it into words, or can it just be like an abstract concept?
Well, that's a really good question. I think a lot of rationalists would say you need the words. A lot of philosophers in general would say that um, you need this is a really interesting question because not only philosophers but other scholars, linguists primarily, have argued over the years that language shapes the way we think. Um, so I imagine that there are quite a few people that would say, yeah, without being able to talk about these concepts, we're never going to be able to get as clear about these concepts. And we're coming up on the linguistic view of the a priori, which says that a priori knowledge is really conceptual knowledge, and those concepts are kind of shaped by the language we use to think and talk about them. So I hope that answers your question. Um, but this is one of those themes that we'll be returning to, right? The role of language and thought. I'm sure this will come up again. Um, so there are some pretty trivial a priori truths, like the examples we've been using, right? All bachelors are unmarried, etc. So these are things that are true by definition. And that's where the language sort of conceptual stuff um, comes in to play. Or that is how I guess the conceptual side of things, the linguistic, the importance of language is made clear, right? But some rationalists think that we can not just we can grasp not only these conceptual truths, but metaphysical truths via the exercise of reason. So a metaphysical truth would be something like all events have a cause. It's metaphysical because it deals with reality and not our concepts of reality, right? It deals with what is the case. It deals with the world, with existence. Well, that's not a dumb question at all, Jeremiah. It's very, very, very insightful, actually, because it anticipates um, one of the dogmas of empiricism that Quine will try and argue against, which I think I hopefully we will get to by the end of this lecture. But yeah, no, that is a really good point, and we'll unpack that more as we move through this material. But the short answer is, yeah, it might be circular. Um, okay, so if you're a rationalist, you believe that metaphysical truths can be objects of a priori knowledge. Like metaphysical stuff would be stuff to do with the nature of the self, right? Whether the self exists. Like Descartes, I am, I exist, right? Is necessarily true whenever I conceive of it or speak it. Well, okay, that's a metaphysical truth because it deals with reality. It deals with what kinds of things exist, like Descartes, and what Descartes is like. He's a thinking thing. So, remember that the dream argument, just to go on about Descartes a little bit more, don't represent the world the way it really is, and that's why we don't trust them. And Plato, like Descartes has this in common with Plato. The senses don't tell us the way things really are. The senses tell us about the shadows on the cave wall, the phenomena, these mere appearances. But logos, that's reason, or nous, the intellect, enables us to know the noumena, the forms, the things, the ultimate reality, right? Now, Crumley doesn't really discuss this, but in Descartes' second meditation, we find the wax exercise, where Descartes has this bit of beeswax, and he's thinking about it. He's like, this beeswax, it's solid, it's opaque, it smells a little bit like the flowers that the bees gathered their nectar from. But if I put it by the fire, it melts, it becomes transparent, and it expands a little bit. So its appearance changes, but I know it's still the beeswax. How does he know? The intellect, because his senses, if he were to trust his senses, he might believe that the beeswax had changed into something else when it melted, but it's still the same wax as before, right? So that's the wax exercise. And if you're curious about that, you can read about that in the second meditation. And that's Descartes. That's a sort of supplementary bit of reasoning concerning why the senses do not reveal the nature of the world to us, and why you've got to use your intellect. See how we're doing for time. We're doing pretty good for time. I forget how many slides I've prepared for today. Well, we're getting there. Empiricism says that reason alone cannot give us knowledge of the world. Sure, there are some things that we can know a priori, but by and large, we've got to go out and actually observe the world and learn about it to see what it's like. So, what kind of a priori knowledge can you have if you're an empiricist? Well, David Hume thought that you could have knowledge of things like the connections between ideas, conceptual knowledge, knowledge of relations between ideas, as I've said in the slides. Well, epistemology means study of knowledge or theory of knowledge. Empiricism means that we can have knowledge from the senses. Okay. As Crumley says, such knowledge is always about the necessary connections between concepts. So all bachelors are unmarried men is true by definition, but it doesn't tell us anything about who's a bachelor or anything like that, right? It doesn't give us any empirical information. It just to understand this sentence, you just have to know the relations between these ideas, between man, unmarried, bachelor, etc. If you mastered all these concepts, then you know, independently of sense experience. Oh, excuse me, that all bachelors are unmarried. And the disagreement between rationalists and empiricists concerns the extent of our a priori knowledge. Um, this is how A.J. Ayer put it, a 20th century philosopher who advocated for what he called the linguistic view of the a priori, which sort of undermines rationalism. Here's what he said. For the fundamental tenet of rationalism is that thought is an independent source of knowledge. And the ground for this view is simply that the only necessary truths about the world which are known to us through thought and not through experience. So that if we can show either that the truths in question are not necessary or that they are not truths about the world, we shall be taking away the support on which rationalism rests. We're dealing only, Ayer is saying, with connections between concepts, and his linguistic view of the a priori, I think, kind of spells out the relation between knowledge and thought, right? Because remember, concepts are you could think of them as ideas, right? They are mental representations. Like if I have a concept of a cup. This coffee mug conforms to that concept, right? So that when I see this, I recognize it as a type of cup. And my cup concept has various like there's various things you need to be to count as a cup, right? You have to have some volume, no holes in it other than the main one, so that no liquid leaks out. Has to be a size appropriate for grasping and drinking, right? So all of these things are part of my cup concept. Empiricists would say that when you have a priori knowledge, all you have is knowledge about those concepts. Plato would say, well, Plato might say that, what we call concepts are actually our understanding of those intelligible forms. So nowadays, we still talk a lot like Plato in some cases where, we talk about universals or concepts. And these are things that Plato would have thought of as forms. So, all right, now we get to the tricky part. So before we go ahead, are there any questions about rationalism and empiricism? Do we all understand the difference? Do we all understand what is at issue when it comes to a priori knowledge? Type your questions in the chat, and I will refill my cup with coffee. So I will be right back. Oof. Oh, goodness gracious. All right. Oh, ow. I seem to have injured myself. Oh. Oh, I was at the gym the other day, and I think I've injured, well, something. I don't know what. Oh, so if you see me kind of wincing in pain, it's just because I am in fact in pain. It's not because I'm not enjoying this lecture, okay? So let's go back to the chat and check out everybody's questions. Jeremiah asks, I still don't get the relationship between linguistics and a priori knowledge. Okay, so like again, like I have a concept of a triangle. And I can say something like all triangles have three sides, and that's necessarily true. How can I arrive at that knowledge? Well, because I have the concept of a triangle that is a three-sided polygon. If it had more or less sides, it wouldn't be a triangle. The connection between that stuff and language is that I acquire those concepts, at least in part, linguistically. And it seems to us that we think in like we think linguistically too. Not all of us, but it seems to a lot of us that we do. So the connection is kind of like, language is what we use to express these truths. And the words we use, the definitions of the words that we use need to match our concepts of what the words refer to. So like triangle means three-sided polygon because when I'm talking about triangles and I'm thinking about them, I'm thinking about three-sided polygons, and that's the word I've got to use, right? So I hope that clears it up. Ashlyn asks, can I restate what rationalism means? Rationalism is the view that says that you can have knowledge independently of sense experience. You can have knowledge by using the intellect alone. Could I define concepts? Yes. Concepts are like mental representations. So we have concepts for everything. Concrete things like coffee cup, car, take your concept of car. It probably includes things like it's got a motor of some kind, perhaps gasoline, perhaps electric. It has wheels, you drive it, etc. That's all sort of contained in your car concept, right? But you can have concepts of more abstract things, certainly. Like, I'm sure we all have a concept of justice or love or beauty, right? So these are things that are a bit more abstract, but we all have concepts of them. Okay. Yeah, don't worry, forms and objects. So if you're a Platonist, you believe that the most real things are not the things that we encounter in our world. But they get their being, they get their reality from the perfect forms, right? So again, to take a simple example, imagine a coffee cup. It gets its cupness by participating in the form of the cup. Or it's like the form of the cup casts its shadow into our world, like those things cast their shadows onto the walls of the cave. And again, this goes for abstract stuff too. There's forms for justice and truth and beauty and so forth, right? It's weird to think about, but yeah. Okay. Do rationalists believe that a priori is sufficient to understand metaphysical concepts? Short answer is yes. Well, I would say metaphysical truths. But yeah, empiricists argue that we cannot rely solely on a priori knowledge. Shania, yeah, that's a pretty good summary. Yep. Chloe says, so empiricists think a priori knowledge is just the connections between the concepts we have of objects and the things. Yep. Yep. That's right. And David says, I just want to confirm that my understanding is correct. So what the rationalists think is that we cannot get knowledge by our senses because what we get from our senses is actually just a projection of the real world. We can only get knowledge from a perfect concept. Sort of, yeah, like the senses. The idea is, I wouldn't say projection, but I think I see what you mean. Our senses represent the world, but they don't necessarily do that in a way that reflects the way the world actually is, right? No, a priori knowledge is knowledge from the intellect. A posteriori knowledge is knowledge from the senses. Not really, Sophia. Like that's not what Plato does. Plato does it in plain language. but I see why you might think that. Can't a priori knowledge be disproven by the demon argument? Well, there's a worry there, but Descartes dealt with that with his cogito, right? He can be certain. I know we haven't looked at this part of the Meditations, but Descartes can be certain um, that he exists, and then he works kind of back to the nature of clear and distinct ideas and the existence of God, and he comes to be reasonably certain that he's not being deceived. Is there a correct view? I don't know, Mahmoud. Good question. Um, I think that we use a bit of both, right? We obviously need our senses to acquire certain concepts, and then once we have these concepts, we can reason out necessary truths. I actually quite like what Kant does, which is where we're headed next. And this is tricky. So Immanuel Kant was a very, very important figure who argued for a Copernican revolution in metaphysics. And I'll explain what that means momentarily. But he claimed that after reading Hume, he was awakened from his dogmatic slumber. Hume came along and said, like, look, remember that this is all about the sort of necessary connection and the constant conjunction. Like, if all A's are followed by B's in the past, and I'm currently observing an A, I'm not rationally entitled to believe that B will follow. There's no necessary connection there. There's, in effect, what this amounts to is that there's no cause and effect. There's only a constant conjunction. There's nothing necessary about cause and effect. So all events have a cause, according to Hume, is not a necessary truth. And this Kant was like, wait a minute, no, no, no. Well, if that's true, we can't know anything. And that's not good. So Kant is trying to save knowledge. So he agrees with Hume. We can know a priori the truth of sentences which assert these connections between concepts. These are called analytic propositions. So remember, a proposition. Oh, excuse me. A proposition is a sentence. It makes a statement about the world, and it can be true or false. And it's analytic because the predicate concept is contained in the subject concept. So, for example, all triangles have three sides. Triangles is the subject concept, and the predicate concept is having three sides. So the having three sides is contained within the triangle, the concept of triangle. So our predicate concept is contained in the subject concept. That is an analytic proposition. Synthetic propositions don't contain the predicate concept within the subject concept. They give us new information beyond the concepts used in the sentence. So a sentence like the pants are purple is a synthetic proposition. The concept purple is not necessarily contained in the concept of pants. In fact, pants can be any number of different colors, as I'm sure you're all aware. So, is everybody following along so far? Yeah, I get it. The first time I read Kant, I was like, yeah, I'm not really sure that I understand what's happening here. But for now, what's important is to understand the difference between analytic and synthetic statements. So analytic statements, just to reiterate for those who are asking in the chat, analytic statements have the predicate concept contained in the subject concept. So, having three sides, again, is the predicate, which is contained in the subject. Triangles. So all triangles have three sides. Same with all bachelors are unmarried, right? What's the subject concept in all bachelors are unmarried? Well, it's not a matter of being implicit. So let's think this through with the bachelor's example, right? All bachelors are unmarried. What is the subject concept in that proposition? Yeah, bachelors. And being unmarried is the predicate, right? I mentioned, one of the ways that philosophers talk about this stuff is in terms of properties. And properties are predicated to I don't know, let's say substances or objects, right? So um the pants are purple. I'm predicating the property of being purple to the pants. But they could be some other color, right? So that's why for the synthetic proposition, the predicate concepts are not contained in the subject concept, but they are for analytic propositions. What other analytic propositions can we come up with? Well, again, like to use one from the textbook, all vixens are female foxes. The subject concept is vixen, the predicate concept is female fox. What else? What other analytic statements can we come up with? Think of something that's definitionally true. Well, I had one earlier. All Joeys are baby marsupials, right? Joey, in this case, is the subject concept, and baby marsupial is the predicate. Not all birds can fly. Well, the problem is we've got the not there. A better one might be all birds have beaks. Yeah, all brothers are males. I would expand that. I would say all brothers are male siblings, Philippe. That's a good one. A cat is an animal. Well, all cats are animals. All cats are animals would be a good one. But yeah, all brothers are male siblings would be a good one because being a male sibling is contained within the concept brother. Being an animal is contained within the concept cat. And that's what makes an analytic proposition an analytic proposition. But synthetic propositions, we can only know a posteriori. Like, are the pants purple? I don't know. I need to see the pants. Show me the pants. And then I can tell, are they purple or are they not? So our knowledge of synthetic propositions is usually a posteriori. And Kant asked, can we have synthetic a priori propositions? That is something that we can know without sense experience, where the predicate concept is not contained in the subject concept. All fire generates heat. All Mr. Redstones are coffee. Well, they might be. But hey, Mr. Redstone is my dad's name. You can call me Dr. Redstone. Or Josh. Call me Josh. Don't be shy about calling me Josh. I don't insist on, professor or anything fancy like that. Well, it's a mistake. Look, okay, so it's a mistake that I get an email sometimes like, "Dear Mr. Redstone," but I feel like if I correct them in an email, I'm gonna sound really nasty. So, like, I might as well do it here where at least I can sound kind of like, hey, Mr. Redstone's my dad's name. I can sound kind of silly if I want. Um, no, my dad does not like coffee, in fact. Well, he's weird. He's like, I like the smell of coffee, but he's got this weird thing about hot drinks. I don't know. I think it might be like, you know how some people have like sensory issues with food? Um, I think it might be that, just like categorically no hot drinks for my father. I think it's just that kind of thing. Kayla, you're right. That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. It's no big deal. It's not a big deal. Guys, I'm not mad. If you call me Mr. Redstone, I'm like, it's all right. Like, I'm not gonna get mad at you. You're not in trouble. Well, Amy, I don't blame you. Oh God, it hurts to laugh. Ow. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, that makes sense though. Yep, I wouldn't want to eat anything with that texture. Oh. Oh, chili. No, chili tastes like chili. It has a texture like chili. Oh, I love chili. Freezers are cold? Yeah. 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 Well, hang on. Because a freezer can malfunction. Um, so all freezers are cold. Well, what if my freezer breaks or the electricity goes out? Um, so that's interesting because empirically, I could find a freezer that's not cold. Um, is cold a subjective statement? Well, I don't know. We do have an objective, like we understand scientists have a more objective understanding of what they mean by hot and cold, in terms of temperature, but uh I mean some people are more or less sensitive to the cold. Like I love the cold. I'll take -30 in the dead of winter over +30 in the summer any day. I know that's not a popular opinion, but it's a hill I will die on because I can get out of the cold. I can't escape the heat. Well, we're gonna get to, whoa, okay, the chat's blowing up. Okay, we're gonna get to the fallibilist point of view. Um, okay, synthetic. Mahmoud, I'll try to answer your question. Synthetic here just means that the predicate concept is not contained in the subject. So your concept of pants might be, article of clothing, two legs, um, and you wear them on your lower half, um, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so that's your concept of pants. Um, that's what it is to be a pair of pants, right? Um, the color of the pants doesn't matter. You can be a pair of pants irrespective of the color that you are. So you can be blue, black, purple, khaki. You could have graphics on them, different numbers of pockets. That's not important in order to be a pair of pants, right? So if I say like, okay, the pants are purple, um, there's nothing in your concept of pants that will tell you whether a particular pair of pants is in fact purple. You have to go and look at the pants and see what color they are, right? Uh, yeah, that's right. Kelvin is like the science one. Well, so is Celsius, but okay. So can we have a synthetic a priori? Kant thinks that we can. Um, how? Well, the mind organizes our experience. The mind structures our experience of the world. So, and here's the weird part. Here's the part that's going to blow your minds a little bit. For Kant, space and time are forms of sensible intuition. Space and time are part of the ways, or are a couple of the ways that our minds organize our experiences of the world. Okay? And we have other things too. We have concepts of the understanding. So, quantity, quality, relation, and modality are concepts of the understanding. But focus on the forms of sensible intuition. We don't know about causality through sense experience. Instead, the mind organizes our experiences causally. So, this is the important takeaway. Where David Hume was like, okay, there's no necessary connection between A's and B's, which is a problem for knowing cause and effect. There's no cause and effect. We can't know about it. There's just a constant conjunction of A's following B's. So, well, that's a problem for Kant, because if we can't know about cause and effect, well, how can we know anything? Think about it. If we can't know cause and effect, we're stuck. We have no knowledge. But Kant to the rescue. Space and time aren't out there in the world. I mean, they are empirically, but the mind organizes our experience in terms of space and time, which allows us to, like, we can say that the mind organizes our experiences causally. So Kant has saved causality. So a proposition like every event has a cause is a synthetic proposition, but we can know it a priori. It's synthetic because the predicate concept has a cause, isn't contained in every event, but we can still know it a priori because the mind organizes our experiences causally. The mind just does this a priori, owing to its structure. And Kant, like, really hits upon something cool here. Like, his view is called transcendental idealism. There are some similarities to representative idealism or representative realism as well, but the idea is that again, what we've got here is a mental representation of the world, not the world itself. Whether you're a Kantian or whether you're a representative realist, there is an objective reality, but we're in indirect contact with it. Okay, so every event has a cause. That's a synthetic a priori proposition. Kant does all of this, in case you're curious, in the Critique of Pure Reason. That's what we call the first critique. Kant wrote 3 critiques later in his life: the Critique of Pure Reason, the Critique of Practical Reason, which is more about like ethics. So Critique of Pure Reason is metaphysics, epistemology, and so forth. Critique of Practical Reason is about like ethics, right and wrong, etc. The Critique of Judgment, the last critique, is about aesthetics. So it's about Kant's theory of beauty. And in all of this, keep in mind, critique means analysis, investigation. It doesn't mean like to criticize something in the same way that, like, I don't know, a movie critic will criticize a bad movie, right? So when we do that, when we critique something in philosophy, we're not saying it's bad. Although we might be, it might be bad, and we might point that out. But that's not all we're interested in doing. Then again, to be fair to movie critics, sometimes movie critics praise movies too, right? So that's what we're doing here. So now we can understand what Kant means by Copernican revolution in metaphysics. So I'll read this bit of the critique to you, of the first critique. Up till now, it has been assumed that all our cognition must conform to the objects, but all attempts to find out something about them a priori through concepts that would extend our cognition have, on this presupposition, come to nothing. So he's talking here about, the problems raised by, for example, Hume on causality. Hence, let us once try whether we do not get farther with the problems of metaphysics by assuming that the objects must conform to our cognition, which would agree better with the requested possibility of an a priori cognition of them, which is to establish something about objects before they are given to us. This would be like the first thoughts of Copernicus, who, when he did not make good progress in the explanation of the celestial motions, if he assumed that the entire celestial host revolved around the observer, tried to see if he might not have greater success if he made the observer revolve and left the stars at rest. Now in metaphysics, we can try in a similar way regarding the intuition of objects. Well, there's a lot there, huh? But basically what Kant is saying is this. He's saying, think about Copernicus. Copernicus was trying to understand the motions of the planets. And it wasn't really working out. Yeah, it was dense. Yeah, you're right. Kant is not an easy read. Right? I recommended that some of you, if you wanted to, could check out Descartes' Meditations. And at least the first two, which are the easy ones, you could absolutely understand no problem, just with what you've already learned from this course, right? Kant, I would recommend saving after you've completed this course, or maybe taken another course. Kant is not, it's not impossible, but it's a lot. You have to really think about each and every sentence Kant writes. Like you have to read it and stop and think about it. Which is, hey, I mean, let's be real. That's a good way to read anything. But with Kant, you can't just be like read. No. It's a thinker. So Kant is like, okay, think about Copernicus, who was trying to work out the motions of the heavenly bodies, and he was working with the Ptolemaic model, where the sun, the moon, and all the planets orbit the Earth. But Copernicus thought, well, what if we leave the stars at rest, as Kant says, and say that Earth orbits the sun along with the other planets? Kant wants to do something like this in metaphysics, where instead of having the objects in the external world conform to our cognition, maybe our cognition can conform to the objects, right? So, yeah, that's a lot. Don't worry about it. I probably won't test you on this passage. Yeah, no, I mean, that's not entirely wrong, And look, we reread stuff. We philosophers, we reread things all the time. It's not like you're going to read Kant once. If you're going to be a philosopher, you're not going to read Kant once and then never pick it up again. Right? It's something you're going to come back to again and again and again. Especially if you teach a course where you have to tell people about Kant, right? Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, Amy, good. Nice. I'll see you there. Well, yeah, don't worry, Jonah. I won't. I might ask you about, a synthetic a priori, blah blah blah, but I won't ask you to explain Copernican revolution in metaphysics. And that'll be for the test. So Jeremiah, that'll be different from your paper. I'll give you really detailed instructions on how to write the paper. Okay, so what are some important consequences of what Kant is saying here? Well, we can't know the things in themselves. We can't know. Kant called it like thing in itself, things in themselves, Ding an sich in German, right? Or in ancient Greek, that's what Plato would have called noumena, the forms. We can't know them in their true reality because the mind structures our experience of them. So there's no knowing things in themselves. We can know that they exist, but beyond that, we don't know what the things in themselves are like in themselves. We can only know about the phenomena, the way that they are presented to us in the intellect, and that all owes to the way the mind structures our experience. So again, we call this transcendental idealism. Yeah, the test is on the course outline. Um, I don't remember the exact date. Yeah, well, Beth, the test is going to be on like all the material from the week prior to the test. Yeah, the 27th. So the week of the 27th, none of that material will be on the test, but the chapter on skepticism, knowledge, and then the next chapter, which I believe is what's our next chapter, is justification. So let me just look at the calendar here. Oh, actually, no. Okay, so if the test is on the 27th, is due on the 27th, and that means then the test will test you on the chapter on skepticism and this one that we're covering this week. So skepticism and knowledge, that will be the subject matter that I'll be testing you on. Okay, so before we go, take a minute and try to appreciate what Kant is saying here. No, there won't be practice questions. But yeah, rewatching the lectures, rereading the text, and rereading your own notes. Yeah, you want to focus when it comes to the textbook. You want to focus on the stuff that we've been discussing in lecture for sure. Okay, so real quick, just to wrap up, for Kant, we've saved cause and effect because we have a synthetic a priori. All events have a cause, which we can know without sense experience because it's not a matter of going and checking the way the world is. It's a matter of the mind. The mind structures our experience of the world in such a way that we perceive all events to have causes. But the way Kant does this makes it such that we can never know the things in themselves. We can never really know ultimate reality, only the phenomena, only the appearances, only the representations. Like, I can only know about this coffee cup as it's presented to me by the mind. What is the real coffee cup like in the real world? I can't know. Indeed, it probably doesn't even make any sense to ask because the mind structures your experience of it like so. Yeah, so good question. The portal for the test will be open the beginning of that week. So you have from that Monday to Friday, you have that entire window to decide when you want to start writing it. And once you begin, there will be a time limit. The time limit will probably be, I used to do a 60-minute time limit, but I'll probably give you a little bit more time. So it's kind of like during that 5-day period, you can choose when you want to write it, but then once you begin, the clock is ticking, as it were. Okay, so we haven't quite finished everything for today. But that's okay. We'll catch up next time. So, well, this is covered in the first lecture, but probably 10 true, false, or multiple choice questions and 2 or 3 short answer questions, probably something like that. Well, you'll have over an hour. I haven't decided how much time exactly, but you'll have over an hour. And by the way, I'll put all of the everything you'll need to know will be in the instructions for the test. So don't panic. Yeah, it'll be on this stuff and the stuff from last week. How long should it take? Well, I don't know. I can't really say. Thanks, Noamine. Um, I can't really say. Some students write very quickly. I will tell you that if a quiz is written in too little time, that's a dead giveaway for cheating. So, um, you know, um, yeah, you must actually write your answers. You can't use a search engine or chat GPT. That will not be allowed. Oh, goodness. Okay, thanks everyone. It's time to go. Um, have a good rest of your day, all of you, and I'll see you all again on Thursday. All right. Yeah, yeah. For those that want to know about what learning materials you can consult, your notes, the textbook, and my slides, but you can't copy and paste. You absolutely cannot use search engines or chat GPT. And I have ways of finding out if you did. So just don't. Okay? All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day. Um, well, yes, it is open book. That again, this has been explained. So, check the course outline, check the first lecture. A lot of this has already been explained there. And there will be instructions before you begin the test. So don't panic. Okay, I've got to go head up to campus to teach another class. So I will see you all on Thursday. I hope you have a good next couple of days. Well, yes, you do need the textbook. Perhaps somebody can share, if somebody's acquired a digital copy, perhaps they can share with you. I would put a message out in the Discord server asking about that. Oh, good. If the campus book, okay, good. So hopefully that's true. Get up and you can buy yourself a copy, and it's a great book. Okay, I have to go, everyone. But take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.